In this series, we've been talking about compensation for the minister of music, adequate pay for the minister of music. Now, I'm teaching from my book entitled Harp Hunters, the person, position, and purpose of the minister of music. And I decided to begin with chapter 5 because it is about compensating the minister of music. And I'm starting with chapter 5 deliberately because I think that it's an issue that needs to be discussed. Because I think that there's so many things that we don't understand. I don't think that it is fully understood by pastors nor musicians. So in these sessions, my objectives are: one, to address the issue from a minister of music's perspective, and two, to try and address some of those areas that may not have been considered in terms of thinking about what a minister of music should be paid. Now, the sessions are designed to speak to pastors, yes, but also to musicians, because musicians, you need to understand that you play a role also in your compensation, what it will be. Because if you don't teach people your value, then what you are asking for, whether it's the salary or a salary increase, you may not get, because people don't know who you are, they don't know what you do, and they don't know how you do it. So you can't place the total responsibility on the church. No, you have a role to play also. Now, in our last session, I raised the question: how can the church justify elevating music while at the same time minimizing the value of the musician? And I laid out 2 points in our last session. They are perception and perspective. Now, I'm not going to go into explaining those again, but if you will go back to part 2 of this series, you will hear me talk about that in detail. Now, who are the significant players when it comes to deciding salaries? Now, it varies from church to church, but the pastor is not the only one making a decision about salary. There are other people who are involved in this, and I want to throw out something to you that you may or may not think is valid. You may or may not agree with me, and that's okay, but I want to throw it out there for your consideration because I think it is at least worth considering. In every church, there are financial decision makers. Now, you may call them trustees, the finance committee, stewards, it doesn't matter, but they play a major role along with the pastor, in deciding what salaries are going to be. Now, let me throw this out. Sometimes the economic level of the decision makers can make all the difference in the world. It can be a positive or it can be a negative. Now, what do I mean? It can be hard for somebody who's been working on a job 10, 15, 20 years, struggling to make ends meet. They themselves have not had a decent salary increase in quite a while, to be amenable to increasing the salary or giving someone a salary that is close to theirs or above theirs, somebody who they consider person who just sings and play the keyboard and direct the choir. That's what they know. That's what they see. Now, it can also be the same way with decision makers who are financially secure. Now, they aren't necessarily opposed to giving a raise. They just want to know more. They want to know what warrants a pay increase or this kind of salary, because they also, like the first group, they have no idea what the minister of music, does. That is why it is so important, musicians, for you to teach people your value to the ministry. You're going to hear me say this over and over and over again, because Sunday morning worshipers, they see and experience what you do on Sunday, but they have no idea what goes on between Sundays. Musicians, listen, consider this. Some of us are so good at our jobs until we make it seem effortless. So when it comes to a salary or a pay increase, people are wondering, why does this person deserve this kind of money? Because they don't know what you do. They don't know what you do. So I'm just throwing it out, for your consideration. I'm just saying. There are churches that genuinely cannot afford to pay a minister of music what they think that person is worth. Salaries in most churches are probably the largest portion of the church's budget. In many smaller churches, many smaller congregations, they struggle with trying to meet their monthly financial obligations. So they just aren't able to pay a minister of music what they think he or she is worth. It's not that they're choosing not to pay; they just aren't able. They aren't able to pay a minister of music. They aren't even able to pay the pastor, what he or she is worth. So if you find yourself in a situation like that, let me suggest considering incentives. Now, what are incentives? What do I mean? Let's say you decide to help them with their continuing education. You may buy them a laptop or an iPad. There may be some childcare needs. There may be some business people in your congregation who will be willing to offer their services. And you can think of other kinds of things, but incentives are great relationship builders, because what they say is that I may not be able to pay you what you're worth, but I see you and you matter. Now, let me say this. Here's a word of caution. Do not make a promise that you don't intend to keep. It is better that you not make a promise at all. If you're going to make a promise, be true to your word. And always remember this: a promise is only as good as the integrity of the promiser. Now, pastors, let me say this to you. If your staff if they are your ladder holders, if they are valuable to you, if you need them as you move the ministry forward, tell the congregation. Tell your congregation that you're not pleased with what you're able currently to pay staff, to pay the minister of music, and you want to do better. Tell them. And pastor, if your people love you, I guarantee you they will want to give you what it is you need to continue to grow the ministry. Trust me, in my 41 years of ministry, I've seen it happen over and over again. Pastors have said to me, I'm looking for a musician who understands ministry. And I understand what they mean. Pastors get frustrated when they can't find or they hire a musician who is not ministry tested. You heard the phrase battle tested. Well, I'm calling it ministry tested. And what I mean is this: we expect musicians to come into the ministry fully trained and fully prepared to do ministry the way we envision it. And not many musicians can do that, even if they have a degree or degrees. That does not prepare them to handle what ministry can throw at you. When I took my first position, I brought to that position my expertise in music and my desire to learn ministry leadership. I had degrees, I went to seminary, but none of that prepared me for what I was going to encounter in ministry leadership. I had to learn that on the job. Fortunately, I had a pastor who took me under his wing and taught me and helped me to develop my leadership ability. So, I watched him. I watched him as he dealt with people in various situations. I took note of the books that he read, many of which I read myself. Listen, when a man or woman says that God has called them to preach, there's a process in place. There's education, there's mentoring, there's licensing, and then there's ordination. There's no process in place for musicians to develop into ministers of music. I know that there are conferences and seminars and many courses that I have, but none of that prepares a musician to handle ministry the way the pastor may be, looking for it. So you hire a musician, and when he or she can't do what you expect for them to do right away, then it becomes a problem. Listen, when a person says that God has called them to preach, there's a process. When we select men or women to be deacons, there's a process for their training. There's a process for trustees. There's even a process for the church custodian. So why not develop a process for developing church music ministers? Makes sense, doesn't it? A clear-cut job description written out can really help clear up some things about the minister of music or what he or she does. Too often job offers are made through brief verbal, nebulous conversations between a pastor and a musician. Let me give you an example. I'm looking for somebody to play for my Sunday morning services and direct my choirs. We have 2 choirs, and they have 2 rehearsals every week. What do you charge? Here endeth the job description. Now, tensions arise when there is a special evening program, or the church has a fellowship outing, and the musician is expected to be there. So the musician asks for extra money, extra pay for doing that. But the pastor says he's minister of music. You don't get paid extra for that. That's not the musician's understanding. He was not asked to be the minister of music. He was asked to be one of the musicians of the church. Now, a lot of that could be alleviated if we had a job description. Now, I want to just give you some suggestions of what you need to really include in a job description. So the things I'm going to lay out, some of the things that you can consider adding to the job description, but it's not limited to these things. First of all, the essential function of the job. Qualifications, such as education, leadership expectations, specific job responsibilities, a reporting structure, who will he or she report to, worship responsibilities, office hours, if there are office hours, and then a pay grade, along with a process for incremental salary increases. Now, when I say not limited to, the job description that I just shared with you, some of the things you might include in the job description. When I say not limited to, because ministry is dynamic, it is ever unfolding. So as the church grows, job descriptions change. I mean, minister of music, when you get in, you're developing your department, you're adding components, you change your own job description. Job descriptions are great because they allow you to do evaluations, to have the musician come in, biannually or annually or quarterly, however you want to do it, to evaluate what the minister of music is doing. It gives him or her time to sit down with the pastor and say, this is what I've accomplished, this is where we are, this is what I want to accomplish moving forward. It gives the pastor an opportunity to listen to the musician, share with the musician his vision of where he's taking the ministry and how the music ministry can enhance that, fit into that. Job descriptions are also great for deciding criteria for resignations and terminations. And I mean, if a musician is going to resign, there should be a process. I mean, the musician should give the church a certain amount of time. I'm going to be leaving, and so that they can try to find somebody to put in that slot so the church is not left high and dry. Now, if you terminate the musician, then the musician should be paid for personal days he hasn't used, sick days he has not used, vacation days he or she has not used. I mean, that's only fair. Now, let me close by saying a word to my colleagues in ministry. I'm speaking on behalf of those musicians who see music as a tool to prepare God's people for works of service so that the body of Christ is built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature. I am not advocating for those musicians who see the church as a gig or some kind of holdover spot until you can join the ranks of the other gospel celebrities. Now, I know that it is desirable in many churches to have a well-known recording, artist to be the minister of music because they bring in more people. They put more butts in the seats, and that is very true. But those musicians also travel quite a bit. And as far as I know, there is no such thing as a long-distance minister of music. Well, I hope you will join me for part 4 of this series. Until then, stay safe and be blessed.